In the quiet halls of the National Institute of Mental Health, a question haunted ethologist John B. Calhoun. What happens when a society has everything it needs? When every desire is met and struggle is removed? Calhoun turned to mice and rats, building detailed environments to study their behavior. His most infamous experiment, launched in 1968, would attempt to build a rodent paradise.
He called it Universe 25, a name that would become synonymous with societal collapse.
The enclosure was a 9-foot square pen, divided into sections, a meticulously planned urban environment.
Unlimited food, unlimited water, a perfect climate, no predators.
The only limitation was space. Universe 25 could comfortably house perhaps 30,800 rats.
Day 1. The pioneers arrived. 4 pairs of the healthiest rats, selected from the Institute's elite colony. Calhoun called this Phase A, the strive period, the time of adjustment and exploration. They moved cautiously, mapping their metal paradise, establishing territories, and beginning to nest. After the initial adjustment, life was good. The rats were healthy, social, and thriving. Day 104. The first litters were born, the beginning of the population boom. Phase B began, the exploit period. The population started doubling roughly every 55 days. The universe was filling up, but the resources were still abundant. The mood was energetic.
Social structures began to form. Hierarchies were established. Life found its rhythm.
Nesting boxes in prime locations became highly coveted. The first signs of competition emerged. But the growth was relentless. The mathematics of paradise began to shift towards something darker. Day 315. The population surpassed 600. The rapid growth began to slow, but the density was becoming a problem. There was still enough food for everyone, but there was no longer enough social space. In a natural environment, young rats would emigrate. But in Universe 25, there was nowhere else to go. The pressure cooker was heating up. The established social orders began to crack under the strain.
Calhoun coined a term for what he observed next: the behavioral sink.
The behavioral sink is the inevitable collapse of behavior resulting from overcrowding. It turned paradise into hell.
The first victims were the dominant males, the ones who had maintained order. They tried to defend their territories, but the constant influx of challengers exhausted them. Eventually, the alpha males gave up. They retreated, leaving the females and young exposed. With the social order destroyed, the nesting areas became war zones. Nursing females became aggressive, stressed by the constant intrusions. They turned on their own young. Many mothers simply abandoned their nests, unable to cope with the density. Infant mortality skyrocketed.
Violence for its own sake became commonplace. Random attacks, sexual deviancy, cannibalism.
The stress was palpable. The air hung heavy with the scent of fear and decay. A new generation of rats emerged, born into this chaos. They had never known the paradise of the early days. These rats had no understanding of normal social behaviors. They couldn't court, nest, or raise young. They were trapped in a perpetual state of stressed adolescence. The social fabric had been shredded. But amidst the violence, another, stranger group appeared. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. The beautiful ones were completely withdrawn from the violence and stress of the community. They did not fight, they did not mate,
They did not interact. They only ate, drank, slept, and groomed. They had perfect coats, free of scars. But their existence was empty, hollow. They were isolated not by walls, but by a complete psychological withdrawal from their society. Calhoun described their behavior as the first death, the death of the spirit, before the death of the body.
Day 560. The population peaked at 2,200, far below the enclosure's physical capacity.
Despite unlimited resources, the growth suddenly stopped. Phase D began, the death phase. The birth rate collapsed to nearly zero. The last generation was aging, and no one was replacing them. The violence subsided, replaced by an eerie calm. The society was too broken to fight. The beautiful ones remained, still grooming, still vacant, but they had lost the capacity to reproduce.
They had the knowledge of how to survive, but they had forgotten how to live as a society.
Even when the population dropped back to the idyllic levels of the early days, the rats did not recover. The behavioral sink had caused permanent damage. The trauma was irreversible. Calhoun even tried introducing new, healthy rats into the dying universe, though too collapsed into withdrawal. The social programming had been erased. Utopia had become a cemetery, waiting for its occupants. Day 600. The last conception occurred. The countdown to extinction had begun. The remaining rats lived out their days in isolation, aging quietly in their self-made abyss. They were ghosts haunting a failed experiment, a testament to the fragility of social bonds. The structure itself began to decay, mirroring the collapse of the society within it. The abundance of food remained untouched. The water still flowed, but there was no one left to want it. The experiment didn't end with a bang, but with a long, drawn-out whimper. Day 1588. The last surviving resident of Universe 25 died. The paradise was empty again. The experiment was over. John B. Calhoun published his findings in 1973, sending shockwaves through the scientific community and the public. His report was terrifying, filled with the language of biblical apocalypse and stark warnings for humanity.
The timing was perfect. The 1970s were marked by anxiety over rapid urbanization and the population bomb.
Universe 25 seemed like a direct metaphor for human cities, a preview of our own potential collapse. Critics argued that the experiment wasn't about physical density, but about the lack of meaningful social roles. The rats had everything provided for them. They had no purpose, no struggle, no role to fill.
Perhaps the collapse wasn't caused by having too many neighbors, but by having no reason to interact with them.
Are we seeing echoes of the beautiful ones in our own society today? A population increasingly withdrawn, focused on self-care and digital grooming, while the social fabric frays. Calhoun himself believed that communication and the creation of meaningful roles were the key to survival. He spent his later years designing cities that would maximize social interaction and creativity, not just efficiency. Universe 25 remains one of the most terrifying experiments in behavioral science history. It suggests that the biggest threat to survival isn't predators or scarcity, but the psychological impact of society itself. It forces us to ask, what is the tipping point for human society? How close are we to the behavioral sink? The lesson of Universe 25 isn't that we are doomed. It is a warning that paradise requires more than just material comfort. It requires purpose, connection, and the space to be human. Without them,
we too might face the first death.